23 minutes before 8 here on the program. The reality is the world is witnessing the highest levels of displacement on record, with an unprecedented 70.8 million people around the world that have been forced from their homes. Among them, 25.9 million are refugees, over half of whom are under the age of 18. There are also millions of stateless people who have been denied a nationality and access to basic rights such as education, healthcare, employment, and the freedom of movement. Now, bringing it back to where we live, approximately 35% of the world's forcibly displaced people worldwide are hosted right here on the African continent. And South Africa continues to receive the highest number of asylum applications in the sub-region, combined with a large backlog and complex protection challenges faced by people of concern already in the country. Well, this morning we're honored to have with us in studio the Commissioner for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, or the UNHCR, that's based in Geneva, Switzerland, Filippo Grandi. Great to have you in South Africa and here in Morning Live. Thanks for taking the time to visit us.
Thank you for having me here.
Why are you here? What brings you to South Africa?
South Africa is a very important partner. Let me give you 2 seconds of history. UNHCR has been associated with South Africa for decades. When many people that had been in exile during apartheid came back to the country, we helped many of them return. So we are very proud of this association and to have given a little contribution to democracy and progress in this country. Yeah. And now, of course, you just said it, this is a country that attracts a large number of asylum seekers, so we're working with the government of South Africa in managing these arrivals, this influx of asylum seekers.
Does your visit have anything to do with some of the unfortunate events that have happened in South Africa? We talk to xenophobia, a lot of our government officials call it criminality, attacks on the people that we're talking about that come to South Africa seeking refuge in one form or the other.
Well, of course, many refugees, as many South Africans, as many migrants, as many other people, have been impacted by this violence, as we know. I would say that it's clear to me, even after just a couple of days here, the roots of this violence are in social issues, in poverty, in inequalities, things that we heard the President say must be addressed, will be addressed. So our contribution is to help the government deal with this particular community, this particular group of people, and try to avoid that they're impacted too much, improve the way they are treated, but also making sure that the communities in which they live do not suffer from discrimination. We do a lot of work here in the communities to improve what we call social cohesion, living together between refugees and the communities that are hosting them.
Because that's highly important, and that's where you start to worry. And you know, in South Africa we are going through a very difficult time. Financially, jobs are very far and few between. The economy is not looking good, and people start getting angry when you see other people coming in, taking jobs, and then a reputation is caused. But I know one of the big issues with working with refugees, asylum seekers, stateless individuals, is that they do come in, as much as they may take jobs, they come in with a lot of opportunities. And I think it's an education drive, I imagine, that is also difficult for the UN to sort of balance.
Yes, and let's not forget, the people that are coming for different reasons. There are people that come to look for jobs. We would call them migrants, of course. This is, they have to be also treated with dignity and respect. They need management. And then there are people, these are the people we deal with, that flee from conflict, from persecution, from discrimination in their own countries, and they come here to seek asylum, to seek protection. It is important, although sometimes difficult, to make a distinction. And we, UNHCR, can help the government deal with the refugee component, with the asylum component. We're here also to help the government, at their request, to improve the manner in which this phenomenon is dealt with. Systems here were designed for much smaller numbers of arrivals. Yeah. Now this issue has become bigger. Like in many other countries in the world, systems have to be adapted, and this is what we're working with the government with. Then, of course, there is the whole big problem of migration, economic migration. This is a much bigger issue that requires it's the responsibility of the government, but requires also a collective effort to help the government do that properly. The two are parallel, the two are interdependent, but they are separate issues.
So I know that you met with some of the refugee representatives yesterday in Pretoria. You also had a video link to refugee leaders in Cape Town. What do you make of our setup here in South Africa?
Well, of course, many of them said that they had been impacted by this violence, but it is interesting. I asked them, are you impacted because you are refugees? And they said, no, we are impacted like other people in our community were impacted, but yes, we are more vulnerable in a way. And many of them talked about the lack of documentation, slow process of being recognized as refugees. These are things that, of course, the government knows. The government has asked UNHCR to help them accelerate this process, make it more efficient, so that people don't have to wait for a long time to be recognized or not as refugees, and in case they are, to receive appropriate documentation so they can work, go to school, and so forth. So this is what we're looking at. Yesterday I met with the Minister of Home Affairs, and we had a very constructive discussion on how to do this work together.
I know that UNHCR has also recently deployed an emergency team here in South Africa. What is the work of this team? I know you're saying you're trying to assist South Africa and representatives to try and make the process of documentation and everything a lot smoother and quicker, because people sit and say they have been trying for years. I mean, we spoke to an individual on the program who had gone and stood in a queue for almost 15 years every day and has gotten nowhere. So that's obviously one of your big rules. But the emergency team, what are they here for?
I don't even know if we should call it an emergency team. We sent some people to reinforce our team here in South Africa to work in the communities. Hosting large numbers of refugees and asylum seekers, because we don't want their presence to be an element of additional tension, but rather the opposite. We want to make sure that their presence is accepted, is understood. Let's not forget what I said earlier. These are people that come here because of a very difficult situation in their country. So South Africa is giving them protection, is giving them a safe place to stay until the situation in their country improves. So we want the communities to understand this, and we also want to do small projects that can help bring people together. So the team that we've brought here is working with government, with civil society, with NGOs that are playing a very important role in all this to address these issues at a very grassroots level in the community.
Yeah, and one of the big things that the UNHCR tries to emphasize is the fact that, and promote, is that refugees do offer a country something. I mean, we're talking about doctors, we're talking about lawyers, whatever they may be, teachers, lecturers, whatever. And they come here into a country and not necessarily able to practice what they have learned. And I know that there is a message that there is so much that a refugee can assist in a country that they have unfortunately left behind to find a new home somewhere else, or in an interim. Is that the kind of message that the UNHCR tries to promote?
For sure. Refugees can bring a lot of skills, a lot of ideas, a lot of dynamism to their community if they are given access to services whenever possible, to jobs. They're not here to compete with the local community. Once again, let me say it once again, I've said it many times, they're forced to come here. This is not really their choice. They would rather stay in their homes, but because there is war, for example, or there are human rights violations, they have to leave. I think it is important also to understand that on the part of South Africa, this is a very noble gesture to give refugees asylum. South Africans themselves, as I said, experienced this in their history when times were difficult and harsh here. Many left and sought asylum in other countries. So this is a country that understands this dimension. But of course, when the economy is in a difficult state, when competition for jobs is higher, tensions increase, and we have to work to appease them together in full understanding for the plight of these asylum seekers.
Just finally, as we wrap up the conversation, statelessness is a massive issue that the UNHCR are speaking about a lot lately, and I don't even think that some people in South Africa realize what stateless is. Never mind the fact that there are so many stateless people living in this country. The winner of the Nansen Awards, which we was actually just over a week ago,
right.
it was honoring an individual who had managed to help about 14,000 people from Kyrgyzstan get some form of documentation. But here in South Africa, what really upsets me is that so many children are affected by statelessness. And these are South African children heading households that have nothing. No birth certificate, no passport, no nothing. They don't exist, but they live here and they are South African. How are the UN trying to help these people that are living in this country?
First of all, to try and get a sense of the size and the type of this problem. This is not just in South Africa.
Certainly.
In many countries we have this, because a lot of the statelessness in this region comes from not being registered when you're born. And when you're not registered when you're born, you enter into a life of invisibility.
Yeah.
People don't even know that you exist, and as you said, you cannot go to school, you cannot work. So I think civil registration, registration of birth, universal birth registration is really the objective. Actually, I have to say, the South African government has been in the forefront to embark on a campaign to address this problem. I'm going to Lusaka tomorrow. I'm going to participate in a regional meeting, in an African meeting on civil registration. I'm very encouraged, and we heard it last week in Geneva at our headquarters, many commitments to finally address this problem and make these people from invisible to visible to meaningful, full participants in the life of their societies.
Fantastic. Well, we wish you a good trip here in South Africa and moving on to Zambia. I hope it goes really well, but thank you for talking to us. A great pleasure and honor to have
Thank you,
the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, the Commissioner there, Filippo Grandi, talking to us about his Southern African tour. Let's take a break. We'll have more after this. Do stay tuned.